Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The rain fell in fine needles on the glistening black asphalt of the alley. The neon signs flickered, casting red and green reflections on the puddles. An old woman walked slowly, leaning on her carved cane. Each step seemed measured, precise, as if even at her age, she walked with the discipline of a lifetime devoted to command. The eyes of passers-by avoided her, or at least ignored her. To them, she was just another old woman. But in the shadows, 3 young men, dressed in dark sweatshirts and muddy sneakers, noticed her immediately. One of them sneered. "Hey, Granny, do you think we're going to let you pass peacefully?" She didn't answer. Her head was held high, her gaze direct, but her eyes shone with an unreadable gleam. There was something about her posture, an imposing calm, that made the young thugs hesitate for a moment. The tallest of the 3, self-assured, stepped forward and tried to nudge her shoulder. She didn't budge. Her hands, wrinkled but firm, gripped her cane and planted it in the ground as a symbol of silent defiance. "What do you want, old lady?" he snapped arrogantly. She inhaled deeply and slowly, as if drawing upon an invisible reservoir of authority. Then, in a clear and distinct voice, she said, "I think you don't know who you're talking to." The words held no threat, but each syllable resonated with the authority of a lifetime spent commanding men and battles. The young men exchanged an uncertain glance, and a shiver of unease pierced their arrogance. Then, with a slow but deliberate gesture, the old woman took a medal out of her pocket, shining faintly under the neon lights, a military badge engraved with the name, General Eleanor Jackson, United States Army. Time seemed to stand still. The rain was still falling, but the world around them had changed. The thugs realized, too late, that this old woman was not just a fragile woman, she was a general, a commander who had led men in situations where fear had no place. And in that tense silence, Eleanor remained motionless, calm, impassive. A simple old woman to some, a legend to those who knew how to read the signs of true strength. The 3 young men remained frozen for a few seconds, their eyes fixed on the shining metal. Not a word came out of their mouths. One of them, Mike, tried to mask his fear with a forced laugh. Okay, you're an old soldier or something, but that doesn't change anything, right? We just want your bag." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, calmly, almost amused. "You really want to steal from me, young men?" she asked calmly. "You don't realize what this entails." The youngest, Jason, called out. "Stop talking like you're in the movies, Granny. Just give me your bag and everything will be fine." Eleanor took a step forward. Her shoes made a dull thud on the puddles. At this simple movement, Mike stepped back slightly. He couldn't explain why, but something in his gaze paralyzed them both. "Do you think your height or youth is enough to inspire fear?" she retorted. "I've led men in operations where every second could be their last. Do you think I'm fragile because I have white hair and use a cane?" Jason chuckled, but this time his laughter was less confident. He reached for his bag, an awkward gesture, and Mike turned to grab it. "Never mind," he murmured. "I don't know, something's off about that old woman." Eleanor took another step, holding her cane in front of her, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of authority. "Fear is not a tool for the weak. It belongs to those who know how to use it wisely," she explained calmly. "You can leave now, or learn to feel it within you." A cold wind swept through the alley. The thugs exchanged a hesitant glance. Mike shook his head. Okay, we're leaving, for now." Without another word, they stepped back, then turned the corner, disappearing into the darkness. Eleanor stood there, motionless, watching their escape with absolute calm. Then she resumed her walk, her measured steps echoing on the wet pavement. Everyone in the alley who had witnessed the scene felt something inexplicable, the respect commanded by Eleanor's mere presence. Murmurs began. Who was this woman? A soldier? It's obvious, there was something in her eyes. And Eleanor, the forgotten general, continued on her way as if nothing had happened. But for these three young people, this encounter would remain etched in their memories as a lesson. True power is not measured in brute force, but in mastery and dignity. Eleanor stepped through the door of her modest apartment, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The place was simple but tidy, shelves filled with books on military strategy, framed photos of battles and ceremonies, and carefully displayed medals. Each object told a story, each memento bore witness to a life dedicated to service. She placed her cane near the armchair, sat down, and closed her eyes for a few moments. The rain was still beating against the windows, as if the outside world wanted to remind her of her past exploits. Flashback, Afghanistan, 1999. The icy wind swept across the forward camp. The men under her command trembled, not with fear, but with respect for her. At 32, Eleanor had already led several delicate missions, sometimes in the heart of danger. Corporal Davis. Report. She shouted across the camp. Every order she gave was precise, every decision swift and decisive. The soldiers knew that the slightest hesitation could cost lives. Yet, she knew how to listen, understand, and protect. Eleanor's strength lay not only in her training or experience, but also in her ability to inspire, trust, and demand the best from everyone. A distant explosion shook the ground. The soldiers rushed to their positions, and Eleanor, unflappable, coordinated each movement with calm and authority. It was in moments like these that she had learned that fear could be transformed into discipline, and danger into a lesson in courage. Back to the present. Eleanor opened her eyes. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy but purified atmosphere. She placed her hands on her knees and breathed deeply. The confrontation in the alley had been a reminder, even at 72, her past, her experience, and her presence could command respect, sometimes more effectively than any physical force. She looked at the medal on her coffee table and smiled slightly. She hadn't sought glory or power. All she wanted was for those who thought they could intimidate others to understand that some lessons are not learned lightly. And that night, General Eleanor Jackson knew that the city had just witnessed a fragment of its legacy. Discipline, courage, and authority have no age. A few days after the alley incident, Eleanor was walking around her neighborhood to get some fresh air. The autumn sun bathed the streets in a soft light, but the atmosphere remained tense. Passers-by, aware of her imposing presence, offered her a slight, instinctive respect, even without knowing her past. But the danger never truly disappeared. Three men, more imposing than the previous ones, advanced towards her with obvious intentions, intimidating posture, calculating looks. "Well, look what we have here, an old lady all alone," murmured the taller one, with a cruel smile. Memories of past missions flooded Eleanor's mind, dangerous terrain, soldiers to protect, quick decisions that determined life and death. Every muscle in her body tensed slightly, but her face remained calm, impassive. "Gentlemen," she said in a calm but firm voice, "you are making a mistake. You don't know what you are causing." One of them, arrogant, tried to approach her and push her. In a fraction of a second, Eleanor made a fluid movement. She placed her cane between them like a barrier, tilting it slightly forward. The gesture, simple but controlled, was enough to unsettle the man. "Back up," she ordered, each word cracking like a military command. The other two hesitated, surprised by the precision and speed of her movements. Eleanor took advantage of this to step back, straightening her posture with the natural authority of a commander. "If you don't want to end up humiliated and hurt, you'd better leave," she repeated calmly. The thugs exchanged a glance, this time less certain. They were no longer facing a frail old woman but someone who knew exactly how to handle danger, and who showed no fear. After a few seconds that seemed to last an eternity, they stepped back, muttering hurried apologies before disappearing down the side street. Eleanor stood there, silent, watching them flee. The calm had returned, but the tension in her shoulders lingered slightly. Each confrontation was a reminder that even wisdom and experience couldn't completely banish violence from the world. Back home, Eleanor sat down and placed her hand on her medal. A thought crossed her mind. It wasn't just about protecting herself, but about showing others that courage, respect, and discipline never disappear, even in the face of fear and brutality. And in the streets of her neighborhood, the whisper spread, this old lady, she was not just a survivor. She was a living legend. A few weeks later, the neighborhood's atmosphere changed. Rumors circulated about a small gang that took advantage of the shadows in the alleyways to intimidate the residents. Neighbors whispered about recent robberies and overconfident youths who had taken it upon themselves to rule the neighborhood. Eleanor sensed that the relative peace of her life was coming to an end. That evening, as she was returning home after running some errands, she heard rough voices behind a half-open door. 3 figures approached her, but this time they were taller, better organized, and clearly ready to attack. That's an easy target. The taller one whispered, a shining knife in his hand. Eleanor stopped, placed her hands on her cane, and took a deep breath. Her gaze hardened. In her mind, she visualized the military maneuvers she had led, the strategies she had taught her men. Every movement had to be calculated, every gesture precise. You don't know who you're dealing with, she said calmly but authoritatively. One of the thugs took a step forward, but Eleanor didn't back down. Instead, she made a fluid movement, striking the ground with her cane, creating a sharp, unexpected sound that startled the aggressor. Then, with a swift motion, she dislodged the hand holding the knife and knocked the weapon to the ground. The speed and precision of her action left the others speechless. I advise you to leave immediately, she repeated, each word sounding like a command. A cool breeze rustled the leaves around them. The heavy silence gave the thugs pause. None of them dared attack again. Eleanor remained calm, ready to act if necessary, but confident in her ability to neutralize any threat. After a moment that seemed to last an eternity, they walked away, murmuring to each other, intimidated by the old woman's quiet strength. Once alone, Eleanor went home and locked the door. She placed her cane on the coffee table and looked at the medals displayed on the wall. Every mission, every battle, every decision had forged this tranquility and authority that nothing and no one could shake. That night, Eleanor Jackson understood that her role in the neighborhood wasn't limited to her own safety. She was becoming, willingly or not, a symbol, an old woman, certainly, but a force to be reckoned with even by the most audacious young thugs. A few days later, the neighborhood was in turmoil. The gang that had terrorized the residents decided to strike harder. This time, they had planned a coordinated attack against several businesses and residents, hoping to capitalize on the fear they had sown. But Eleanor had anticipated this escalation. She stood in front of her building, observing the street with implacable calm. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned every corner and every shadow. She knew exactly what was going to happen, because her years of experience in the army had trained her to read the terrain, to sense danger before it even appeared. The thugs appeared, this time in large numbers, armed with iron bars and knives. Their arrogance blinded them, and they had no idea that the old woman they thought vulnerable was a general capable of coordinating a real defense. Stop immediately! Eleanor yelled, her voice echoing throughout the street. But this time, she didn't just threaten. She used restraint techniques she had taught her soldiers. With a precise movement, one of the attackers was disarmed before he even knew what was happening. Another was thrown sideways by a combination of force and imbalance. Her movements were quick, calculated, almost choreographed. The passers-by, who had started to flee, stopped and watched. Their eyes betrayed their wonder. This old woman, whom they had always seen as fragile, was in control of the situation with icy efficiency. In a matter of minutes, Eleanor neutralized all the thugs. None were seriously injured, but they were all disarmed and unable to get up. She knelt before them, and her piercing gray eyes fixed on each of them. Whether you like it or not, there are rules in this world, she said slowly. Fear never gives you real power. Respect, discipline, and self-control do. Understand? The thugs, trembling and humiliated, nodded their heads. They knew they had just met someone extraordinary. The entire neighborhood, witnessing the scene, gathered. The murmurs turned into cheers. It's her, the general. The old lady, that's a legend. Eleanor straightened up, placed her cane on the ground, and smiled slightly. She knew that her battle was not only against thugs, but to remind everyone that strength lies not in fear, but in self-control and dignity. That night, Eleanor Jackson was no longer just an old woman in the neighborhood. She became a living legend, a symbol of courage and respect, and no one ever dared to underestimate the old lady who had led battles and commanded men with an authority that even time had not erased.